We are now moving into a panel on the future of warfare and lessons from Ukraine. I think that's a very long list now. I would like to welcome my speakers here. Starting on the left, the Army Captain Janne Jaakkola. He is the Chief of Defense of Finland. Welcome, sir. Michael Kaufman, a regular here at the Helsinki Security Forum, Senior Fellow for the Russia and Eurasia Program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace in Washington. And on my right, Johannes Alt. He's the Senior Vice President for Stark Defense. He was a German MP and in the German Air Force for 20 years. So I'm surrounded by a lot of knowledge here. And I want to start off as a journalist mostly with the question that, again, as I mentioned this morning, was on everybody's mind, is on everyone's mind right now. What to do about the airspace incursions of Russia into, in future cases like Estonia witnessed yesterday, or the airspace, which also, of course, is quite close to Finland. At the moment, the Estonian parliament has called its foreign and defense committees into session. The foreign and defense ministers are there, and they are discussing what more can be done, what more should be done, how can they better protect themselves. So I'm going to have a very quick lightning round with my panelists and ask, starting with General Jaakkola, do you agree that simply escorting Russian planes out of Finnish Estonian NATO airspace, as we've been doing for years, is enough of a deterrent under current circumstances?
Thank you. First of all, if you look at from the military perspective, what happened. So you saw the alliance, the Italian F-35s reacting according to the air policing. You see the Swedish Air Force and the Finnish Air Force reacting on that one. And of course, you need to, from this perspective, you need to have the big picture where this incident is linked into the ongoing war in Ukraine, into the airspace violations in Poland and Romania, and so forth. And so what happens next is the big question, and how can you prevent it? So what is the level of the deterrence? On a military side, of course, you can see that it's working, but of course now it's a question about the will, which translates into the rules of engagement and this kind of question, and it's the question of capabilities. Of course, now what we have, for example, in this, what happened in Poland, in NATO we reacted with those capabilities that we have at hand, but is that an optimal solution against the drones? No. But of course we need to do something, but the future is the next thing. But now we have to concentrate on this one. And of course, what happens next, that's a political question, and I'm pretty sure that it will be addressed in NATO in the beginning of the week. And from the Finnish perspective, from our experiences with being here for a while with Russia, do not provocate. So you need to react, but do not overreact on that part. Exactly. Of course, this is a very tricky thing about this. Don't escalate. It doesn't mean that you step back. You need to do something, but do not provocate the situation because this, of course, was a test. And if you militarily look at the situation, 3 aircrafts, MiG-31s, they could not match the F-35s. They could not match the F-18s or the just Gripens. So on a military side, there was no kind of military threat in that sense. So to react with very kinetic measures right away would be a mistake in this case.
But if we're talking about lessons from Ukraine, Ukraine also did not provoke.
I strongly argue that the next phase of this, if you don't, let's speculate that we don't do nothing. The next stage will not be a kinetic attack against Baltics or Poland. This is a test, and they are now looking at what's the reaction. And in this case, then it's a totally different thing. But as I said, now it's about politics, it's about will, and it's about the willingness to pour it into the real action, which means rules of engagement and how to design the countermeasures. I would like to emphasize that this air policing mission was conducted in Baltics. It was not part of the Eastern Sentry operation.
Right.
So this was
It was air policing.
separate air policing mission with that rules of engagement.
Which many people are saying should now be called air defense. But anyway, Michael, your view on this? If we just keep doing what we've always done, we're just going to keep getting what we've always gotten, which is that they fly around in NATO airspace as they like, and then they get to fly home happily. Good enough?
Well, Terry, you're kind of leading the question here with your own answer. But so as an analyst, I spend most of my time admiring the problem. I'll say first that I think to me the policy side of this is actually more interesting. It's an area I work less on. But from my point of view, what this is really testing is a degree of cohesion of transatlantic alliance and first and foremost the US response. Because when Russians talk about NATO, the first thing they talk about is the United States. And if your question really is, should more have been done? Should we react differently? I'll be frank, I am disappointed by the US response, at least on the political level.
To the airspace incursion? You mean the lack of response?
Yes, absolutely. Okay. Absolutely. It tells something. Silence also tells you something. The second part, on the military technical side. So to me, what was much more concerning is what happened in Poland, because it showed what I think many of us have known and have talked about for a long time, that the capabilities that NATO has are optimized for a particular type of war. And what we see in Russia, Ukraine, whether it's cheap drones, one-way attack drones, the ability to saturate air defense with high-volume, cheap capabilities like that. Let's be frank, the F-35 trying to shoot down styrofoam drones with the AIM-120 isn't really the optimal solution.
They didn't just try, they got 3 of them.
Yeah, they got all 3 of them.
They did.
Yeah, for the low price of what I can only imagine that might have been.
Tens of them.
And let's be frank. So we knew that this was a challenge and that the solutions are available. We can see them deployed in Ukraine. It's just a question of getting after this problem set. Maybe last part. So this is going to be distinctly American perspective, but things up here tend to be quite procedural. And I think this is an opportunity to review the procedures as to how folks react to these kinds of air incursions and perhaps to take on more risk. There is a tendency to believe that we need to be very, very risk averse. And here I'm not trying to be a little hawkish, but there's a tendency to be very risk averse to avoid accidents. But folks need to appreciate wars do not have accidental causes. They have political causes, okay? And if you believe in conventional deterrence, the strength of NATO's conventional deterrence against Russia, they need to believe that the degree of risk that they are taking up with this form of signaling, right, with these types of incursions, you can also upload some degree of risk on NATO's side as well, rather than responding procedurally and traditionally as folks have done before. Situation change, context change, and maybe you need to adapt and revise those procedures with them.
And talking about avoiding accidents, though, the hotline that used to be available, it used to be used between Gerasimov and whoever was Secor, the Russians don't pick up the phone anymore, as I understand it. They're, the hotline that would have avoided accidents has been basically rendered mostly useless. And it did used to work. Both sides used to feel like it worked. So accidents, I think, are a big deal when we're talking about the airspace. How long is it going to be when they're flying with transponders off? When they're filing no flight plans, how long is it going to be before a civilian airliner is involved in one of these things if they start to really escalate from their side? Anyway, that's just a rhetorical question because I'll go to Johannes now. I'm just talking to myself. Johannes, I know that you are no longer a politician, so you may not be able to answer this. So if I ask you what should more be done, perhaps Stark has some answers about what more could be done.
Let me reflect on 2 takes. Thank you very much for the possibility of being here. I agree with my American colleague that we have to develop solutions to counter the drone threat in a more appropriate, affordable way that handles the congestion that we see as one lessons learned of the Ukraine war. What we've seen yesterday, I agree with the Finnish Chief of Defense that all protocols were followed, and we should not over-escalate the situation. I want to tell you a story now as a former politician out of my constituency. I represented until April the biggest constituency in Germany. So from the size, 6,500 square kilometers, 800 villages in the northeast of Germany. And there are 70 to 80% of the public against helping Ukraine. And still 70 to 80% against helping Ukraine and are very critical about any support to this. So it's not a popular thing. So I think all the measures that we design should not be a countermeasure to coherence of our people. And this is also why I think it's very good if we follow our protocols, have an answer, that we react, we show we are there, we do not allow them to do this with our airspace, but we should not overreact and we should not escalate.
But then aren't we? We're not doing anything different than has been done for years. When this is not a new the airspace incursion is not new, so you're not deterring. NATO saying that it is deterring attacks. You're deterring attacks, but you're not deterring this behavior, which everybody decries as unacceptable. But you are accepting it, not you, but it is being accepted by not stopping it.
It's not accepted because we send up a QRA and we are showing that it's not okay, and we are coming out of the airspace. So I think that's the appropriate way to react.
We're just saying you can't stay 12 minutes. We're not. I mean, they're not doing anything about stopping them from coming in.
As I already commented on, I think it's an appropriate protocol, and it's also not my take as an industrial representative to assess NATO's measures on this.
If I may,
I would have turned back.
Sorry. I think we also need to have a perspective of time here. So this is nothing new. The airspace violations. This has been happening like the 85 years backwards. And of course, for example, Finland has this regularly. These violations, and we react. And it doesn't mean that we react at the same level as we have done, for example, the NATO did yesterday. It doesn't mean that there are no measures above that one. But it is, of course, in comparison with the threat level and how do you see the violation on what level. So the pilots, they act accordingly, but they do have, of course, all the measures above that one, but I think they are professional ones, and they will act professionally on the situation. And it doesn't mean that we don't do nothing. That's the military part, as I said. And now what we need to have is the policy side, as Michael said.
So NATO rules of engagement do go up to and include shooting down those planes if it's necessary.
As national ones. So they don't end up in the situation that you cannot do nothing, but the pilots, they start from the perceived violation and the level of threat, how they maneuver, how they act in the situation. But it is the lowest level is to follow on these violations, and if it goes right as it did here, they escorted the Russians to Kaliningrad, then problem solved in that incident.
In this case, yeah. Michael.
Yeah, just to reinforce that, these are fundamentally political questions of policy. We have professional militaries, and I am thankful for that folks out there don't cowboy, right, and don't play loose with the procedures as they are established, okay? And because of that, the Russians know that we have procedures established, and we're likely to follow through them. Now, to the extent that they take advantage of them, that is, at the end of the day, a political question on risk and on policy, right? And if you're asking whether or not we should be engaging differently, right, whether the response should be different, this is both a question for individual nations like Estonia or like Finland, but also a larger question for the alliance.
And there will be a meeting that I believe is going to be on Tuesday. The Estonia's Article 4 meeting is likely to be Tuesday, I'm hearing. The Supreme Allied Commander is going to be briefing at NATO headquarters. So those are likely to be questions that are brought up again at the political level with the input from the Supreme Allied Commander, the best military advice the alliance has. So, excuse me, Johannes, your company could provide a difference if they decide to build a drone wall. Sorry, if the EU with EU funding and NATO direction do decide to build a drone wall. What's possible? What would have been different in Poland this time if some of the capabilities that you know exist had been in place? Sorry, I'm going to cough.
I would not say that the drone wall is a perfect solution, but I would say what the role of industry is in this game is to draw lessons learned out of the Ukraine war. And the Ukraine war has changed, and the predictability has been quite low. Everything has been proven wrong, and basically we have seen 4 trends that we can see. We have seen an enormous amount of complexity. we have seen contestment, we have seen congestions, and we've also seen commercialization. And what we have to do as an industry is to develop capabilities out of this together with the defense forces, and to see that our capabilities are relevant. And this is also what we contribute. If you talk to a Ukrainian specialist, if you go to Brave One, an event that has happened this week, also having the defense tech community of Ukraine gathered, then we see that we have an innovation cycle that has been cut down to 6 weeks. 6 weeks, 4 weeks from lessons learned from the battlefield, tactical lessons, to being included into a product. And the important thing is not to put up a drone wall. The important thing is to discuss about how we constantly adapt and innovate our capabilities. And this is the thing, I think, where NATO could learn quite a lot and could be speed up a lot, because we are quite slow compared to Ukraine. And this is a thing that we could learn from them.
That's right. And General Jaakkola, yesterday President Stubb said that he expected that this would be increasingly done, that lessons would be taken into Ukraine, direct exchanges. And I do know that, especially after it became painfully evident how behind the NATO side was on fighting drones with drones, for example, that there are going to be more exchanges directly between Ukrainians. And in fact, President Zelensky has also announced that they will now loosen the export controls on some of their own technology. That's been something which hasn't allowed some of the Ukrainian technology to come back to its partners in NATO. So are you already seeing these exchanges of information and experience with your Ukrainian counterparts?
They have been going all the way. So this is not a new one. But as you mentioned about the export control, that's a big question.
It is.
And of course, the second question is that how the Ukrainian companies, which are the state-of-the-art companies, are able to establish their production lines and export their technology to Western countries, to start the production also in the Western countries. But I think the most important thing is that not everything is visible. That's the main.
So
not going deeper on that one, but not everything is visible. So what we see in the media or social media, whatever, that's not the whole truth. So of course everybody is trying to learn from the Ukrainians and establish the links so that we will get the experience and the best practices in order to implement them in our development of our own defense. And of course, one of the main challenges is that because the Ukraine is working in the making transformation in contact, the cycle, as Johannes said, is so much tighter that we cannot follow that in the Western countries, because we are not in contact yet, and hopefully not for sure. But the case is that we need to follow the procedural thinking of the Ukrainians, that how do they think the new way, and to try to copy that one. Of course, it will take longer. But for example, in the procurement processes, what we have been using, so that everything takes like 10 years. It's not the case anymore, and it definitely won't be the case in the future. So you need to re-establish and re-engineer these things, and of course, pretty much of the lessons learned come from Ukraine.
And Michael, you're on the front line a lot. You visit the Ukrainians where they're fighting. And then do you come back and do you feel like you're going back in time? You sort of like slow down as you cross the border again?
I mean, in terms of defense discourse, look, here's the way I look at it. So at any given period of time, what I'm interested in is typically three conversations, right? First is what is happening in Russia-Ukraine war today, situation on the battlefield, and that evolves every couple of months. I really do feel that if you haven't been there for 3 to 4 months, you really start to lose currency. It may look from a distance as sort of same, not much territory changing hands, but actually the battlefield is quite dynamic from my point of view.
And you're quite optimistic. I even looked up your last article to see what you're saying recently, and you say it's not a foregone conclusion that Ukraine will lose.
Well, yeah, I think I vacillate depending on which part of the year and which phase of the war I'm in between.
It was your last podcast. It was a couple weeks ago.
Sobering pragmatism or optimism. But at least the way I look at it, if you're asking about the current situation there, I think that we're going to see continuation of Russian offensive effort to the fall up until the winter. Then things may slow down a bit again as Russian forces are exhausted. I think the Ukrainian military is fortunately still holding Russian forces to incremental gains. Although if you look at the front line, it is a series of salients, and it does not lend itself very easily to stabilization if you look at just the geometry of the battlefield. And I think that if you looked at the last 4 or 5 months, you'll see that there's been a shift in tactics on the ground. Ukraine had adapted pretty well in 2024 to the way the Russian military had been fighting, which is trying to grind their way through the battlefield with assault groups and dismounted infantry. The Russian military has worked in the last 4 or 5 months to counter-adapt, deploying their own elite units to try to negate some degree of Ukrainian advantage in how they employ drones. There's Russians trying to deploy their own offensive line of drones, and also switch to infiltration tactics, infiltration maneuver, because Ukraine has continued to struggle with manpower availability, and it's such a vast battlefield. It's 1,200 kilometers of a front line. If I think about the other two conversations, that is much more about what is the future Russian military and Russian problem set. What does that look like on a 5, 7, 10-year timeline, which we have to keep an eye on as well as we talk about what's happening in the Russia-Ukraine war. But the conversation for NATO, for EUCOM, for the United States is, what does that problem set look like? What does Russian reconstitution look like? And then a third conversation, which I think is an important one to have here, particularly for this panel. Okay, what are the implications for us? What from this war can we take as observations versus what are real lessons that are generalizable to our forces? We plan to fight differently. We have to look at how these capabilities are complementary to our own. What choices do we have to make? Because if we add something, we may have to subtract something from our force, from our capabilities. And lastly, what period of the war do we take our lessons from? Wars like this often have a high intense maneuver period and an initial period of war, right? Then they have prolonged positional or attritional phases. So we also have a smart context-based conversation. Are we taking our lessons from 2025? Are we taking our lessons from 2022? Right, because the context of a Russia-NATO fight would be different in the initial period of war. The geography would be different. It would be taking place somewhere, most likely somewhere else. And so we have to think that through as well.
Yeah.
If you honest something here.
I think if you want to follow up directly on that.
Yeah, because I think Michael is here on a perfectly right track, which is not surprising, given your expertise. But what I'm trying to figure out is that, for example, as a start point, how come the battle space looks like it does look like today, even though you have the fast adaptation, innovation, you have the technology, you have the deep ops, you have the nimble, agile operations, and the tactics are developing very drastically, as Michael. But still, we have the attrition, we have the slow winds, no movement. Why? And of course, part of this is because of the restrictions in the capabilities. No air superiority on Russian or Ukrainian side, logistics challenges, manpower, and so forth.
Let's not forget that we left them with no ammo for a certain amount of time, where they're running.
That's a logistical challenge.
Yeah. Okay.
And of course, the other part of the equation is the excellence of the Ukrainian side in the fighting, meaning that they are. With these capabilities, with the technology, with the fast adaptation, they are able to prevent the massing of troops and effects on the Russian side. And of course, they have been able to create a new flank in a sense, not geographically on the ground, but in the low air. That's a new flank in a sense. And then, if you look at the price of a breakthrough in offense, it's tremendous because you can now mass the effects to counter it, and of course, and it's not just drones; it's traditional firepower, artillery, it's electronic warfare, you name it. And the last point in the Ukrainian excellence in the doctrine, from my point of view, is the capability to deliver counter strikes. So basically, what they now have at their disposal is the 24/7 close air support with the drones. Yep. So they don't have to call somebody to wait for the support. It's there already, and so it means that the impact is immediate. And of course, you have to have a kind of a digital backbone for this in order to operate quickly and with precisely. And of course, in my world, this means that there is 3 elements of the battlefield: attrition, maneuver, and precision. In the Ukrainian war, we are now seeing the attrition and precision. And as Michael said, we Westerners don't want to fight the attritional warfare. We want to have the maneuver warfare. And now the question is, how do we do that one? I will continue later on. That's
good. Well, and this is something. Yeah, this is something I was going to say. Johannes might be able to answer on that side. Certainly, the technical side.
The question is still if all these developments, as the General described, resemble somehow in the capability planning, and they are not. I mean, I followed the German debate and the German process in the last years quite intensively as a member of the Defense Committee, and we procured a lot of things. We procured many tanks. If we say in the drone industry, okay, a lot of targets, a lot of new targets we bought. Nobody said that you want to replace tanks. But what we have to say, and I think the British defense has with their new strategy made a step forward, and it's the right approach to say we just buying 20% of traditional systems and 80% of more innovative partially unmanned systems, investing in new technology. And I think it will be also conflicts about who's adopting technology faster. And with our traditional way of procuring and even doing military planning, we are not ready to win. But if we want to go this way and this path, then we have to be also ready to make mistakes, ready to fail, and to having a culture where a politician also says, I take the responsibility because this project, this billions or this millions we invest in something, they were misinvested. It failed, the project. And this kind of culture we have to also find and adapt, that we are willing to accept these mistakes on the way.
And that reminds me of another discussion that we have had for also years, decades maybe, on military mobility, something so simple, but no politician gets reelected by saying, I'm going to make that bridge bigger so that potentially if we go to war, a tank or another armored vehicle can get across it. And this is why military mobility has suffered so much. And if you did ever have to fight a war, God forbid, more than half your stuff isn't coming to Finland's border because they literally can't get across a bridge or they can't use a train, the rails. Military mobility has been an abject failure, looking from Brussels anyway. Yes or no?
I would argue that within the Nordefco cooperation, we have been able
to but you cannot. Okay, so your Norwegian friends are going to be here.
Within the Nordic cooperations, for example, with Finland, Sweden, and Norway, we have been able to establish that. Is it enough in a current situation, given the possible reinforcements from the NATO? Not, but.
The Germans aren't going to make it.
Yeah, okay.
Too much paperwork.
Sorry.
No, you know that. You can't even get across the lander.
You're very deterministic.
But I'm here to be the provocateur, just in case you guys were safe. No, but it's still a problem. It is still a real problem.
You cannot just look other way around.
And it's a very basic problem that could have been fixed, and people aren't thinking about it because it's not sexy. Germans?
What we could fix is in delivering fast capabilities, and what we are working in Ukraine in the last month is to work on this hunter-shooter complex. As you say, that we have the time from having a reconnaissance result and detecting targets to an effect on the battlefield to shorten this down to a few minutes, and this can give you a superiority that is really needed on the battlefield, and that's what's currently tested in Ukraine, to link together different kinds of drones from different producers, Recce drones, ISTAR drones, that are delivering a safe network that a drone can operate even in a heavy EW contested environment, and a strike drone together to delivering effects on the battlefield.
And actually, maybe you don't need the tanks to come from Germany anymore if that's the direction it's headed, right? But really, I mean, if the next war, Michael, is not going to be fought with tanks.
We can take out a lot of tanks.
If you're not going to need these backup forces that are literally crawling along, trying to get to the border areas, and I mean, is that conceivable that if you're spending only 20% on these vehicles or on these kind of capabilities, and 80% is going into new innovations, they're not going to be things that need to cross land to get there?
Okay, so first, I think it's unlikely that if we look at traditional conventional systems, that's not going to make up still the bulk of NATO defense expenditure. And the legacy and inertia of having this in your force means you're going to maintain it for many decades to come. The question is, how do you adapt it to the modern battlefield, to the challenges that we see there? How do you make it survivable? And how do you enable the way of war you'd like to engage in? And then how do you add these other capabilities to be complementary to traditional advantages? NATO is advantage in terms of air power, in terms of combined arms, force employment, joint force operations, what have you. First and foremost, what NATO deploys isn't tanks. It's actually air power as a major force multiplier, right? And that's one of the big things the United States brings to the table.
Exactly.
Beyond that, you have precision strike. You have a lot of things that can show up pretty early onto the battlefield. Yes, for a number of countries, it would be harder to make these big muscle movements of heavy equipment having to roll, across rail or roads or what have you. That may be true. On the other hand, if you look today in Ukraine, you'll see that Ukraine is largely defending through employment of drone units, but it's a combination of traditional prepared defense that is mines, extensive use of mining on the battlefield, right? Something that we see a pretty big revision of policy on in the Baltics here in Finland. Second, traditional artillery fire, which shapes how the opponent actually attacks. And then that allows drones, which are backing a force that is entrenched defending, to be much more effective and much more capable in that fight and engage in a degree of zonal defense. Can drones by themselves hold the front and stabilize it? No, I don't think so, based on what I've seen. I don't. And I would never argue to anybody, hey, and I've seen these arguments out there, the sort of futurist arguments of, look, we can just have drones. Or that traditional land weapon systems are too expensive. Look, if you go to Ukraine, nobody there is going to get out of an infantry fighting vehicle or an APC or a tank and get into something else that's far less survivable. Okay, if you think that you want to get out of a Leopard tank, which can take 20 hits from drones, Lancets, one-way attack munitions, admittedly a big target on the battlefield, and you think it's better to maybe strap a machine gun to your BMW and attack in that manner, you can try it. Okay, no, seriously, what are your proposed alternatives? Okay. It's a genuine question. If you want to get into a much less survivable platform, the crew will never make it out of it and won't survive one hit on a modern battlefield. To me, this is not a very smart proposition. So the question is how to enable the systems, how to enable the formations we have, right, to engage in combined arms maneuver. And one thing that we can clearly see from this war is the further evolution of precision strike ability such that we have mass employment of precision systems on the battlefield, backed by pervasive, cheap, expendable sensors, and backed by the data networks that are fairly resilient to enable this way of fighting. This is actually the more important part of the conversation, but usually the most boring one for most people. Things like mesh data networks that enable you to use UAS, UGVs, what have you. Actually, a lot of the money and the cost goes into that rather than the actual drone itself. And what it shows us is, look, maneuver warfare is still very possible, but it will have to be earned. Okay, and if the right adaptations are not made, it's going to be very costly because mass precision is a big multiplier to the challenges that have historically been posed by prepared defense, by mines, by these other systems, right? And lastly, I think as always, we have to revisit in any force, especially in Western military capabilities, the balance between, the expensive and the complex and the cheap and the simple. Right? And for the last several decades, we've been overly focused on procurement of the highest end and the highest sword capabilities that are still relevant, that are much more expensive and complex, and F-35 is a good example of that, right? And grossly insufficiently underinvested in the cheap and simple, which we also need.
That can also be innovative, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely.
The cheap and simple.
Right.
And now you're seeing defense as a driver of innovation again that has disappeared for the last decades, more or less. And you see companies that on their own costs, backed with, as an example, venture capital, building their own products, going to the military and say, hey, here we are, we have a capability, would you like to buy it? Before having prioritized capability lists and what all kind of procurement documents you normally have. And this is also helping to develop the capabilities further. And I think that's also a big chance for Europe. And this is also a contribution the industry could make, actually, of putting down, making a commitment, buying long lead items, installing production lines. As we speak, for our company, I can just say, beside the German production line, we're currently installing a 40,000 feet production line in Swindon, UK. And we're installing production line in Ukraine also, just to be ready when it's needed. This is a contribution you can do.
Needed. If it's needed, you hope.
Yeah, when it's needed, if it's needed, yeah. But this it's a commitment that we could do. That we could do and say we prepare and we just don't work when we get already the bill and the order.
Yeah. Right, which is what has happened now, which
Because this
the
could
lag
be
of
industrial
the
deterrence
years.
and is also an important means for NATO.
Yeah, we could talk a lot about the delays in defense and production, but other panels are doing that, and I would rather not.
If I may continue, because I was a little bit, before the panel, I was a little bit worried that I will be the old general, the good old chap who is riding with the cavalry to the First World War, but I thank you, Michael, for your comments on that. I agree, and additionally, because this is not about technology and this is not about material merely, because in order to excel in maneuver warfare, as Michael explained, the human factor, the training and the proficiency of the soldiers and leaders, and again, the operational art and doctrine must be adapted to the new situation. So you don't man the equipment, you equip the man. That's the versus. And of course, we have these strengths in the Western on Western side. Whether it be the high-end technology or whether it be the proficiency and the doctrines, we just need to follow them and make them better. And part of that is, of course, enhancing the current traditional platforms with new technologies and surrounding them with the new ones that are protecting the ones, and of course making the survivability of the soldiers and the platforms in the battlefield better. And of course, there's always the question: how much new, how much old, and of course the model most probably, as Michael explained, will be the hybrid because of the all existing traditional platforms we have. But then on the other perspective, the thing that we should not do is to be the second or third mover, follower of some technology, because then we will give the advantage to the other side. We need to be ahead of. And of course, how do you do it? That's the question, but that's why we are thinking about these solutions.
Well, to give some credit to NATO, they have established their accelerator. They've got Diana.
Exactly.
I mean, they are working on this, not leading and not following.
We had this Task Force X unmanned systems working in the Baltic Sea during the summertime, and I just read the final report on this one, and it is very promising, and that's the way to do it.
Exactly.
Very quickly adapt the new reality into the concepts and to the training of the units.
So I promised that I wanted to open to the audience, because otherwise we're just, I feel selfish keeping the panel to myself. So I will intersperse now audience questions. Do I have any hands? I promised one question already, and so I'm going to take Yles Radio, the company that gave me my start in journalism, and Maria Stenros will get the first one. And then I saw one more over here.
Hello, Maria Stenros from Finnish TV broadcaster Yle. Have to come back to these Estonian airspace violations. It's also about deterrence. Now Russia seems to be using the NATO airspace. They come here, they fly here 12 minutes, they send their drones, and NATO seems to be following. They say this is reckless, this is irresponsible. NATO is angry, but there seems to be nothing really happening. What's the role of the deterrence? Does Russia want to make NATO ridiculous? And what to do about that?
Okay. All right, I'll try to go one at a time until we run out of time. Would you like to take that? It's kind of a restatement of what I asked earlier, but good to have a second try.
First of all, credible deterrence is based on real defense capability. That's for sure. Okay, that's clear for everything. And of course, something that we are now, I would argue, refiguring a bit is the deterrence in the situation as we are now. We need to make a separation between the current situation and the potential threat of conventional warfare. So if I start on the later one, what is the probability of Russians launching a conventional large-scale military attack against NATO as we speak? Open question. No answer.
I thought you were going to answer it.
No. And then we will move on to the situation as we are now, destabilizing actors, hybrid warfare, if you will, and so forth. So we are now in a kind of a liminal warfare, as the term goes, I guess, where you have different thresholds of observing things, different thresholds for attributing things, and different thresholds for responding things. And after the response threshold, there is an open conflict.
But they've moved a lot on attribution, for example. They used to not even attribute.
Exactly. And now this is what we need to discuss.
Yeah.
And of course, I don't know if it has to be refigurated or relearned, the concept of deterrence as we speak. But it's pretty much, as was earlier on discussed in the when the Ukrainian ambassador was talking here, it's about the Russian decision-making calculus, and it's about escalation management as such. And we need to relearn those things. That how Russians are now playing with the situation. How do we play the escalation management game? I know it's a very good, it's not a very good word for that one, but it is actually action, counteraction.
Yep.
Measuring that one. We need to really relearn that one. And of course, there's no playbook for this kind of accidents. If there would be, we would be following that one and be done with that one. Of course, for the pilots who are intercepting the airspace violation, it has to be very strict, and they have to be conducted very professionally. There's no room for, as Michael said, for cowboy-like behavior on that one. So it is for us, for the decision makers, to make the rules clear on this one, on a political side, on a policy side, on a military side, legal side, and so forth. But I would not surrender in this situation as such. I think that the cynicism and sarcasm is the lowest mode of thinking. So we should not be there. We should be better than that one.
Was that a message to me?
No.
Michael?
Well, I feel like we're treading the conversation, opening a panel. Well, I'd add on the question of deterrence is heavily tied to coercive credibility, right? Of which capability is one component, and here I don't think NATO has a problem, although based on what we saw in the drone strike in Poland, there are a number of things there to work on in terms of adaptation and optimization. But the other parts are resolve and effective communication of that to the adversary, and that's where most of the issues tend to lie, from my point of view. First, an effective demonstration of political resolve, and second, communication of it. And sometimes, from my point of view, you see insufficient demonstration of resolve in terms of political reaction. And other times, you see too much, but then nothing in terms of follow-through, where there's a great degree of indignation and outrage, but then you basically say, all right, well, what is the alliance really prepared to do about these things? And the answer can be not that much, right? Or at least not that much changes. So both, to me, this is where the issues tend to lie in terms of calibration, much less so in capability of what the militaries do. And the militaries are inherently constrained by these other factors and what policymakers choose to do.
Do you want to add to that? Okay, I'll take the question. This gentleman here, and can you tell us who you are? And then Charlie. I can't
it's
see.
Again, Ukrainian ambassador.
Oh, there you are. The one who was. No wonder I really can't see you.
Okay,
Yeah, who was up
yes.
here with me? Sorry.
Very quick, if you allow me, just a couple of comments, and the question will follow. First, honestly, I'm, after 3.5 years of war, I'm really frustrated to hear that still such a big numbers of German people in your constituency say that they don't support Ukraine or delivering weapon to Ukraine, because either you don't work properly with them and don't explain what is at stake, or those people just simply dream about Russian tanks in Berlin 2-0 and they are happy with that, and that's the only explanation. Because in my view, the war, it's very simple, you have black and white, you don't have any gray colors or shadow colors or whatever. And these people, when they hope that they will sit somewhere in the corner, do nothing, and hopefully somehow the war will be over and will not touch them, it's very naive. It's very naive, and you should tell them and explain them what is at risk. Because otherwise that will do Russians instead of you. And they are very now efficient as you can see the development of different political parties in Germany. The same actually goes to the general. When I hear that you say we need to react in the way that not to provoke after 3.5 years, pardon to say, but it's kindergarten. I will remind you the things which happened in 2015 when Russian jets were violating Turkish airspace. One time, another, third time, and suddenly the plane was shut down. And I assume that Erdogan had the same protocols as you have because they're all member of NATO. But they reacted, they showed power, and what happened afterwards? Erdogan is still visiting Putin, Putin greets him, they are doing business, etc., and no violation of the airspace. What I want to say here, that guys, let's become more mature. We cannot wait and do things just to react. You should realize that Russians are just laughing at you. When they are doing these provocations and they see no reactions, they see your weakness. And you're looking weak. So what is our just appeal to you? Wake up. I mean, enough talking about, yeah, we will not escalate, we can do this or that, because it will not end up the war. Then we should then change the topic of today's discussion into not lessons learned from Ukraine, but what happens to us when Ukraine loses. Not even if Ukraine loses, but when Ukraine loses. Because with such approach, we will lose this war. And then the tragedy will happen in a bigger scale. So that's the only thing I wanted just to comment. And here again, to provoke these discussions again around how to properly react to this Russia's provocation in NATO space. And of course, how to strengthen our capability to stop them on our soil instead of allowing them to continue. Thank you.
Thank you. You have outdone me in terms of being the provocateur, I think. Johannes, I mean, this is a problem in Germany. And again, if we go back to lessons learned from Ukraine, we do know that you have to fight the disinformation in advance or you provide fertile ground for the Russians to come in.
It's a two-folded problem. In my city where I was grown up, I'm from East Germany. As you know, as I told you, are living 25,000 inhabitants. So a normal middle-sized city. And when I was a small boy, we had 25,000 Russian soldiers or Soviet soldiers were there. So people are not afraid of them. They know them. They know them from friendships, from the garden. They were in kindergarten with them. They worked in the Russian bases until I was 8-9 years old when the Russians left the town. So they're not afraid of them. This is part of the problem. And there was no cultural adaptation really to NATO after the reunification in Germany. And this is why we have really also, if you look at our polls, to explain it quite easy, not as an industrial representative, but as a former politician from the area. This is why you see the old East Germany. You could, to the municipality, go down and see the polls and see that they are leaning towards these parties that are heavily supported by Russia. Because this cultural adaptation never has really happened. And it's a generational problem. I don't see it as a big problem of the young generation, even though they are also influenced by their parents, by their grandparents, sure, when I had them in parliament as groups, but I see it as a problem of the parent-grandparent situation. There you have this very vast majority of people that are saying, oh, Putin, he's not such a bad guy. And this is a thing that's really hard to overcome. And Ambassador, you can believe me that I, in my term, argued every day 20, 50 times, tried to explain in a soft way and in a harder way the situation. But it's really hard. Believe me, it's really hard. And I invited even think tanks and we had events to explain this. It's really hard to boost this kind of cultural change in East Germany. And this is also a flank, and this is a flank because this is why I said don't escalate too much. Don't escalate too much, because it's also a hybrid threat of having people. If you're having people in an area that see completely different on the security situation on our international system, and if they all live in one area, that's a problem for a country. If they're not spread over and they're just a minority, but if they're in one part of the country, are really a majority, and this we have to work on. I see it.
It's so interesting, though, because the case Finland also had, when I first moved here in '89, there was a friendship, cooperation, and mutual assistance treaty, which was it's now inconceivable that the Russians were seen that you were going to go and defend them. And, this, when it was, what is it, 92 or 93 when it died? Ambassador, you would know off the top of your head. So how is it so different in Germany than it is in Finland, where nobody here wants them back?
I don't know about that one, but if I may comment on Ambassador's not provocations, but comment on those one. Of course, it is very good that we discuss these topics, issues publicly, but everybody knows that we don't design the solutions here. So not anybody of you will say, raise your hand and say, shoot them down. Nobody of you will say that publicly here. So the designs for deterrence and defense, it's a different venues and different forums that they are discussed. And of course, as I said about the cooperation between Ukraine, not everything is public. In a sense, so I think we need to be frank for each other that we discuss these problems, and it's good that we discuss, but this is not the venue where we solve the problem, as we all know. Sorry about that one. And the question was?
No, I mean, it was from the ambassador. Just he said that Russia's laughing because NATO isn't responding in a stronger way. But it is true that, as I mentioned earlier in my panel with him, there's nothing between Article 4 and Article 5. You know, nobody's also going to call war over provocations of incursions into the airspace. So, but I'm sure this is something that's discussed all the time. And you have new regional plans that, at least on NATO's side, would respond in an updated way to these kind of true threats to NATO territory. But I mean.
Of course, as I said,
we'll get more questions from Charlie.
We have been living in this area and in this situation for a while in Finland, and this is the airspace violations, this kind of thing. That's not a new thing.
Yeah.
So basically, it's very academic, and I would personally avoid to make make an issue out of one incident. Okay, this is very serious. This harassment, and it should not be accepted, but you must see it in a bigger picture, as discussed earlier on. Nobody is accepting this as a new fact, as a new normal. But how do you cope with the situation? How do you change your posture? How do you change your position? It's a process of policy making, and then draining it down to the authorities and so forth. And it's not in the case when we are not war. This is not a military thing. It's a national thing very much, and it's also about the other authorities, border guards and so forth. So big picture. That's my message.
It is also notable, though, that the Baltic states and now Poland just last week have changed their regulations so that foreign troops can be on their soil during peacetime. I mean, this is something that at least makes it possible. So there are adaptations all the time. They may not be big, flashy headlines, but they're happening. Michael, do you have anything, or can I take Charlie's question?
Not really. I mean, I'd like to say my ammunition doesn't want to direct to me. But the one thing I will say is I appreciate the rather provocative comment from Ukrainian colleagues. And there is a point to be made here. The Turkish example is interesting.
Oh, that's right. We should talk about
the Turkish example is interesting as a national example.
Yeah.
And we can discuss how that worked out further on. But one of the challenges we have is that NATO is not a country. It's an alliance where collective decision-making has to be made. Now, Estonia and Finland are not Turkey, okay? I personally don't think that's a bug. I find that to be a feature, okay? That being said, these are questions of national decision-making, right? No, being frank here, right? So if we look at Erdogan and what he chose to do as an example, maybe you think that worked out well for them, but it doesn't mean that Finland, Estonia, Lithuania can do the same on their own. And here part of the challenge is working within an alliance and coming up with a collective posture. The only other thing I'll say is, and here, you know, we're all allies now to reinforce my alliance stage, is to say one part of the comment I do feel is a bit misplaced. It is not the job of a senior professional military officer to publicly question the policy and advocate for a different policy on stage in a forum. That's the reality. And it's unfair to put them in that position.
Thank you.
But, okay, Charlie, next question. And I have another question over there. I don't know. We only have 5 minutes, and I don't know if
Charlie Salonius, Pasternak, Nordic West
Let's
Office.
make it short.
It is very rare that I'm the least provocative person asking questions. So quickly, lessons. What lessons for China, either political, military, from this? And then is one of the lessons for NATO to better integrate conventional and nuclear plans and systems, including for Finland?
Okay, I hate to take multiple questions, but I'm going to do it because we only have 5 minutes left. Tutti, and then, my German friend over there.
Thank you, Terry, and you're a perfect moderator, by the way. I'm Tytti Tuppurainen, Finnish Parliament, and I certainly think that we have a lot to learn from Ukraine. We can learn from Ukraine. Its armed forces are perhaps the most efficient in Europe, and its military technologies are developing so rapidly that they are probably soon most advanced in Europe. And the problem is that Russia knows it too. And Russia wants those resources for itself in order to use it against us, against Europe. And let us not think that it would be not possible, because we can learn from history. During the Second World War, Soviet Union used Ukrainian soldiers against us, also in the territory of Finland. So do we really understand what is at stake when we talk about defending Ukraine and the question of who gets the military, outstanding resources of Ukraine? I think they better be on our side and not on the Russian side. What do you think?
And changing that to not defending Ukraine, but helping Ukraine win, which is a phrase that not all politicians are willing to say. Okay, and the last question, and then closing remarks from the panel.
Terry, thank you. Jan-Willem Röpert from Germany. Actually, I'm asking a question about the topic of we are talking here. It's about lessons learned for future warfare. I heard a lot about supportive technologies. Yeah, but that's only, like drones, is only one part of the picture.
Everybody will have.
So actually, I want to challenge you a bit. Maybe the answer lies already in the past, because we see, again, the rise of, let's say, old technologies, old tactics, old doctrines, and also the question, who will be the personnel? We're talking a lot of professionals, but who will be the second, third, fourth, and fifth group of people who will take up the weapons and fight? So maybe we should not stop, but resharpen our center of gravity out of supportive technologies more to who are the people who will do it at the end, and what are the tactics which might help us win. Thank you.
Okay, so we have 1 minute each for each of the panelists, and I hate to do this, but choose what you want to answer, and please make this your closing remarks. And Johannes, I'll start with you in reverse order from the beginning.
Okay, I think I'm taking the last question. I think it's very important to focus on technology. So during my general staff course, there was one sentence that I'm remembering from defense technology, and there was said, okay, even smaller nations have a chance to win against a very powerful big nation if they are able to adapt technology faster than others.
Winter war, bicycles.
So, and I think this is this we have to understand. We have to understand that even the time of putting things in old warehouses, this time is gone, because if you have modern weapon systems, they need care, they need constant updates, and they need innovation. This is what Ukraine shows us, that they survive because they adapt innovation faster than the Russians in many domains. And this we also have to do. But still in our force, NATO force, we procure like 30 years ago. We buy something, we put it in a storage, even though knowing that it's completely irrelevant in 2 years and could be thrown to the metal trash or whatever, because it's irrelevant and it's not survivable on the battlefield. So this we have to change, we have to adopt, and we have to integrate this kind of new systems into our maneuver warfare and our tactics in NATO and into our capability development. I think we have to be more bold, more innovative, and more brave with this. And then we hope that Ukraine will also win. Sure.
Oh, that's a great statement. That would have been a good one to wrap up the entire panel. I hope these guys can do the same. Okay, Michael?
I didn't realize it was a competition.
Yeah.
All right, so I'll take the last question, which I found particularly of interest. I think the challenge I always see with technology is folks get into the conversation on capability and forget that the enduring challenge is you first have to make choices on force design and force structure allocation on manpower. One of the challenges we have in European militaries, and also in the US too, is everybody wants to add this as a way of fighting. Nobody wants to allocate the people and the talent to do it in organizational capacity. And one thing you see from Ukraine is it still requires quite a few people, right? If you want to employ drones, you're going to need drone companies, drone battalions. That means choices. What are you going to take away from your force? You can't have everything. What are you going to get rid of to enable this way of fighting? Or are Europeans going to finally expand force capacity, the one thing you don't find much of in European militaries, right? People are keen on buying capability. They're not keen on expanding the actual force size, which you're going to need to do, from my point of view. Next, a lot of it has to do with training. We are very far behind on training with any kind of these systems, okay? Ukrainian colleagues sometimes joke that we're at the sort of bow and arrow stage of drone employment compared to them. And it's not an unfair comparison. I spend a lot of time in Ukraine in the front lines, and they are right, because I go back and I see what we're doing in defense innovation and other things, and we're trying to catch up, but we are kind of, you know, there at the starting phase. Can you imagine how much time we'd have to spend to train a much larger force to employ these capabilities? And lastly, we shouldn't ignore the enduring challenges in warfare. Force generation, force management. If a war lasts beyond the initial period of war, how are you going to mobilize people? How are you going to train them? Who is going to replace the parts of the force that you lost? And how are you going to prove that is sustain and adapt the military over time in a prolonged conventional war if it gets to that point? You always have to have that plan B. In the case that you don't win in the initial period of war, it's not a decisive resolution of the fight.
And just handing over to General Jaakkola for the final comment, I think one thing that my Finnish friends have impressed upon me is that when the war ends in Ukraine, even if Ukraine is successful, which everyone hopes, Finland is actually in a more dangerous position than it is today, with all of the forces tied up. This is something that is really, it's kind of a shocking thing to think about. Then Russia has time to rebuild, reconstitute, and reposition the forces back on the Finnish border. So that's just something, as I lead into your final comments, I think that Ukraine winning the war doesn't solve everything. So we are going to have to look at this question no matter what.
Yeah, you're right, but because we are on overtime, so I will be very tight, and I will quote the Great Britain during the Second World War. Keep calm and carry on. Thank you.
That's it? All right, thank you very much, guys. Oh, and I have instructions that everyone is to remain seated while Kuka Maria comes up with further orders.